The war in South Central is the sixth deadliest war in American history. The Crips and Bloods had exterminated each other over the last 50 years in retaliation or simply just being from the other side. It evolved into a cultural force that spread through the USA and then worldwide. But how did this all start? South Central LA was born out of racial segregation. The black people here faced a lot of racist violence up until 1960. Different neighborhoods were organized into self-protection clubs to defend themselves. Manufacturing jobs started leaving Southern California in the 70s, leaving thousands of men unemployed and increasing the crime rate. This started to build a lot of stigma around South Central, on top of racist stigma already imposed on the people living here. Almost everyone was poor, so crime basically became an economic activity in South Central. The poor neighborhoods had it hardest. Growing up in South Central was tough by many standards. Mass poverty, absent fathers, easy access to drugs, gangs, and high crime. The place had many small neighborhood gangs that robbed and beat people up on a regular basis. This made Los Angeles militant in a negative way. Dudes became extremely territorial over their neighborhoods and would walk around with bats, knives, and guns. A storm was brewing, and it was only a matter of time before all-out war broke out and violence escalated. The youths had no future prospects. They were caught up in an environment that glorified and valued all the wrong things. Their version of the American dream was being a pimp, gang leader, hustler, or a kingpin. Drugs ran rampant in SC, even before crack cocaine. They had stuff like window pane, tie stick, love leaf. Kids had access to this stuff from a young age and were hopelessly addicted. Drugs kept them even more trapped in the hood because this is where they could feed their addiction with ease. It was an escape from their harsh daily realities they faced. Going into the 70s, South Central had already bred a generation of desensitized and fearless youth. These kids had seen violence at home, school, and on the street. They had been arrested and sent to juvie countless times too. By the way, back in the 70s, a murder would only get a juvenile 2 years in jail, so they weren't even scared of the law. Cliques like the Figueroa Boys, Brims, Pyrus, and the Chain Gang would defend their blocks and control the crime in them. Over the years, a kid named Stanley Tukey Williams had built a rep for himself as a notorious street fighter. He would peruse the west side and dish out fades to bullies and anyone that wronged him or his clique. Tired of the constant pressure from opposing gangs, Tukey had the idea to unify the gangs on the west side to form a large, unstoppable force. Over on the east side, another notorious cat named Raymond Washington had a similar idea. One fateful day, they met up in St. Andrews Park and founded the Crips. Yes, the Crips with a B. A lot of cats pronounced it Crips though, and the name stuck. They would eventually click up with another gang leader by the name of Mac Thomas, and he would be the founder of the Compton Crips. So the original sets were the West Side, East Side, and Compton Crips. What seemed like a glorious idea would send thousands of black souls to God years later. But to them, they were finally strong enough to defend their blocks from their enemigos. The Crips would come down full force on South Central and have everyone shook. Tukey and Co. would organize attacks and robberies from Washington High School, which was like the Pentagon for Crips at the time. Dressed in black gloves and gold-colored earrings, they would literally beat other gangs into submission. Smaller gangs started begging to join the Crips so that they would stop being victims. The Crips didn't even make the news until the Robert Ballou murder in '72. He was sadly killed for his jacket at the Forum, and this announced the Crips to the world. Shots started popping off around '76, sensing the odds weren't in their favor. The many gangs that weren't smart enough to click up felt they had to ante up. That's when the shooting started. And don't get it twisted, they had guns all along, but the guns were mainly used for robbing. The goal had never been to kill the enemy, but to send a message and instill fear. Crip hoods started becoming victims of regular drive-bys, and they started losing comrades. So the Crips started packing heat too, 44s and rifles, were flooding the South Central. Entire sets were armed like militias, ready to lose their lives for a purposeless cause at a moment's notice. The gang scene was making a transition from the days of fisticuffs to full-scale armed warfare. Younger dudes were getting into gang life and itching to make a reputation for themselves. You kill one of ours, we kill 3 of yours. Retaliation after retaliation. Hearts turned cold, and murder became normal in South Central. Being a Crip was an illusion of purpose and power. Members were fiercely loyal and had a sense of invincibility that made them fearless of jail or death. They would see their homes die, even attend their funerals. But this didn't faze them in the slightest. Dying a Crip was an honorable way to go. Crips would receive more love from more people at their funerals than they did their whole lives. After the funeral, it was right back to Crippin' full time. No holidays, no days off. You couldn't retire either. Crippin' was a lifetime commitment.
Like I tell these young cats, this gangbanging shit, it's not a joke, it's not play, this shit a lifestyle. No matter where you go, niggas, if niggas know you, they know you.
The Crips were expanding rapidly, and smaller sets started to pop up on all sides. Gangster Crip, Neighborhood Crip, Harlem Crip, etc. Being a Crip in South Central got you respect. It was as simple as that. Ironically enough, that respect was obtained from oppressing other blacks. Raymond Washington got out of jail in '76 to find the whole gang scene had changed. People had put their dukes down and picked up guns, and many prominent Crips were in jail or in the grave. He had lost his power as well and didn't have the same control he had over the east side before he went in. Mac Thomas of Compton Crip had gone in as well and came out years later to find out his leadership structure had changed. He was killed for as part of a robbery loot years later. Younger Crips didn't like taking orders, so they started forming their own sets. This set the tone for the Crips, never having any real structure, because OGs would get locked up and someone else would take over. A repeating cycle. When PCP hit South Central, it exaggerated the violence to a new level. This stuff would give dudes superhuman strength and the resilience of a zombie. Tuki got addicted, and this dramatically affected his leadership abilities. He went on a 4-year rampage of violence in South Central. It finally caught up with him, and he went down for 4 murders in '79. This meant that all original Crip leadership was dead or in jail. Younger cats would start smaller sets all over the west side, east side, and Compton. When this happened, the violence would only get worse, and that's when the Crip on Crip violence started. Tuki's generation created style, rules, music, personalities, and martyrs that would influence Cripdom. But this new thug life culture will continue to tear up LA and turn young men into statistics. Stay tuned for part 2. In the 80s, the wrong answer to this question could result in death. With all the original leaders dead or in jail, the Crips fragmented into smaller sets. Unlike the Mafia or Colombian cartels, the Crips had no central structure, and members didn't really take orders from any specific person. Meanwhile, South Central was like a third world country, existing in the U.S. Average life expectancy for males was 19. Constant chaos and police choppers in the sky was the norm out here. The whole atmosphere was rife with bad intentions. It was turning into a complete war zone, too. The war between Crips and Bloods was picking up steam. They would even start fighting amongst each other. Kids were joining Crip or Blood sets as young as 11 years old. See, joining the gang was the most exciting part of some of their childhoods, because belonging to a set meant family and protection. The peer pressure was too strong for a lot of them, especially kids who came from homes when they didn't get a lot of love. So they put all that aggression from their abusive home lives into punishing the opposition. They were initiated to the gang via a 5-man beatdown, and they would then ride out into enemy territory to kill or maim some poor fool. After that, it was all downhill for most of them. Jail or the grave. Few made it out.
Why do you need the weapons? Because guys don't fight anymore. They don't use the. We used to fight, but they don't do that anymore. Guns. All about shooting, taking them out.
The thing is, in these poor neighborhoods, all you had was respect, so you couldn't afford to lose it. So much so that trivial infractions, like stepping on someone's shoe, was a capital offense. These people didn't get any respect from the rest of society, so they had to get it from somewhere. The goal was to win and preserve respect by creating fear. Gang members were programmed to kill on sight, and they were fanatic about killing, ready to die or do time for the set too. People embodied the street names given to them. Monster Cody is one of the best examples of this. He got his name from beating a man so bad during a robbery that he was permanently disfigured for life. The cop who found him said that whoever did this is a monster. So Monster Cody became just that, to live up to the name. Years later, his book gave many Americans a glimpse of the reality of life in American hoods. at least in the 80s and 90s. I highly recommend it. Aside from Monster Cody, South Central was breeding people with antisocial behaviors, and they didn't even know it. But to them it was normal, because a lot of them had never left the hood. It was home to murderers, junkies, kleptomaniacs. Making it out of here was no small feat. Notorious figures like the Grim Sleeper, Lil Fee, OG Turtle, and plenty of gangsters that had double-digit murders would emerge from South Central. Unbeknownst to them all, the robbing, hurting, killing, and dodging death was taking a mental toll, and a lot of people from that era had serious PTSD issues. A lot of Crips got caught, and they started to fill up California prisons. So gang politics basically exported itself to the California prison systems. Ironically, for some prison was better than home, and combining that with the Crip culture in jail, they were wired to be repeat offenders for life. It was September 27, 1979.
After school, we got to fight. You know how it is. They went on the side of Hobart. Friday, homies, head up. That's what we usually do. Them is our type. 60s our dogs. We ain't tripping. Head up, handle that beef, squash it, step on. Fatty started fighting with Tyrone. Tyrone's brother was Big Rick, OG 60, rider, moneymaker, hustler, thug motherfucker. Him and Fatty fighting. Boom, bad, boom, both big youngsters. Boom, bad, boom, bad, 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 boom. Squalling. Who named Daryl Oaks, the hood just recruited. He was originally from 9-0. Went around the corner, got the strap, the homie. Came back, he was on the hood like 2 days. He thought it was something more serious than just the fisticuffs, and that's all it was. And it's 79. Ooh, this is 70s. It's September, 79. Man, it's still the 70s. It's all about this, fool. Fool come back with the heat, tell Fatty move, dump, boom, boom. Kill Tyrone, shoot him in the head and the chest. Shoot Bogart, boom, from the 60s in the stomach. Rest of them break. We all break too. We're like, damn! Man, what you tripping on? 60s coming to the hood though. Big Rick, the OG, Babyface, Baby Huey, Motor Mouse, 60s, OGs, killers. Coming to the hood. All they wanted to shoot her. Killed their brother. They ain't tripping. Like, man, we want the motherfucker to kill my brother. So Big Rick said. We was like, man, we don't know him. We didn't. He just started claiming the hood in 2 days. We couldn't give him up. We didn't know the motherfucker. Fools them took it as a sign of us saying we ain't giving him up. We threw a big meeting, big sidewinder, big Keystone, all them from the 60s, Big Joe Rat, Mumbles, Mumpy. Threw a big meeting at the park. The meeting became a big gang fight. It fell into name calling, disrespect. People started getting hit, bombed on. It turned a big gang fight. Pigs came, helicopter 40 feet off the ground, ran everybody off. From that point, September 27th, 1979, the Rolling 60s and the A-Trains have been mortal enemies. They've killed over 20 of my homies, and we've killed over, I'm sure, 27, 28, 9 of them.
It's been a war ever since. 70 plus bodies have dropped on both sides since that day. Crip on Crip violence will become something common. In fact, Crip unity never really made it out to 70s. But regardless of the murderous beefs, the different citywide sets still maintain their Crip culture and identity. Today there's multiple Crip on Crip beefs and alliances. Many prominent Crips came up during this era. Cats like OG Turtle, Monster Cody, Goldie Loc, and Lil Fee became notorious Crips due to their proficiency in violence. Stripes were earned for inflicting pain on their enemigos. Though a lot of them would try to change and reverse the damage they had a part in creating, both Monster Cody and Tuki would go on to write great books about life in the streets and how pointless it all was. Tuki was even nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. In the end though, if anything, these books only made America more enamored with the Crip way of life and made a lot of youngers want to join the Crips. Crack hit LA harder than anything in the 80s. Incredibly addictive. and it presented people with the prospect of making fast money. It gave the locals here a crack at buying the kind of things they could have only dreamed of before. Drug lords, like Freeway Ricky, came up as a result of this crack economy.
Is maybe $1 million a day, $2 million a day sometimes, maybe more, a few days. This wasn't every day though. Right. It was like we had days that.
That's how much you were taking in.
Right, in one day.
Yeah. Ross says he complained to his supplier, Danilo Blandan, that he had difficulty counting all the money.
So eventually he bought us a money machine, and he brought it over to us. And it eased the pain, a lot. But eventually it even got too much for one money machine. We wound up getting 3 money machines to count it. Because one money machine would just be running, and then we'd have money stacked. And we had people that all they would do all day was count money, eventually.
Full-time money counters.
Yeah.
For the Crips and their blood enemies, this meant more money for guns and more competition for turf. The murder rate shot through the roof. A war on drugs in South Central followed. Harsh and racialized drug laws started popping up, like the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986 and the 3-Strike Law. Crack was criminalized way more than cocaine, even though it was essentially the same thing. The government was even exposed as being complicit in all of this, fueling the crack trade themselves and using the money to fund Contra War in Nicaragua. Imagine being poor in South Central and finding out that your own government did this to you. Though some people made it out this environment, a lot of cats who grew up in this environment were doomed to fail. Coming into '92, gang tensions were high, and the Crips were more active than ever. South Central was a drug and crime-riddled cesspit, and police brutality hadn't changed a damn bit. They were mad at the government for being left out of the American dream and the unjust laws imposed on them as well. The Rodney King beating was the final straw here. A teenage girl named Latasha Harlins was also killed by a Korean store owner just 1 week later. But on the positive, a truce was made between the Bloods and Crips in '92. This truce is credited for the general decline in bloodshed since '92. The rest of the gangs in the city were meant to follow this example, and a lot of them did. This was all thanks to former football player Jim Brown's America I Can Foundation. But only a few days later, both the cops from the Rodney King beating and the Korean store owner were acquitted. So the next few weeks, LA erupted into an orgy of violence. Crips actually started riots, and members can be clearly seen here stomping truck driver Reginald Denny in a scene that was broadcasted all over the nation. '92 to this day still has the highest murder rate of all time in LA history. Rap music, popular books, TV shows, and movies made Crippin' a cultural phenomenon and a global sensation. Kids would imitate the swag and dress code of older Crips to a T. Whether glorified or not, any form of Crip mythology would inspire kids or teens to join sets or claim Crip, even if they didn't live anywhere near a hood. It became the in thing. Attempts to discourage people from gangbanging, like Monster Cody's autobiography, had the opposite effect. It exposed people to the fascinating, lawless world of South Central, which more like a GTA server than real life. People couldn't get enough. Gangbanging culture evolved with different sets, using hand signs to identify themselves. Wearing baseball hats to distinguish themselves from other sets became a thing as well. Gang violence in LA is not nearly as bad today as it is in the 80s and 90s. Not to mention the media also always has a way of making it look worse than it actually is. Can't say the same for cities like Baltimore and St. Louis though. Hip-hop and its subgenres like gangster rap and G-funk take the most credit for popularizing gang culture. It also created a culture where violence sells records. This culture is still alive and well throughout a lot of artistries today. A common blueprint to industry success is rapping about doing drills on the ops, spinning the block, emptying the Draco, upping the murder rate, etc. Crippin' exported itself overseas now, and there's over 100,000 members worldwide. There's a Crip set on almost every continent now, and such is the story of the Crips. Some kids banded together to protect each other over 50 years ago, and it grew into a force of violence 50 years later. Let's hope the violence continues to decline, though. Like and subscribe as well. It really helps the channel out.